After my basic technical Air Force training, I found myself working transport at Westover Air Reserve Base in Chicopee. About 2 months into working transport, I got shifted to night duty for whatever reason. I didn't really question it or get upset about it, that's just the way I've always been. One night in August, I was driving a couple parts from a warehouse about 2 miles from base in my F-350 with my coworker. I'll call him Jay for the purpose of this story. I still remember it was exactly 3:15 in the morning because I had actually been checking the time on my dash since I was supposed to have the parts at the plane cargo area by 3:25 at the latest. The entire time I was driving, Jay was sucking on his stupid dab pen. He always did that when we worked nights together, claiming it was his night shift fuel. At some point he started whining about having to take a leak. I growled at him to hold it over and over, but his inebriated fit was really getting to me. Eventually I gave in and pulled to the side of the road and let him out of the truck, because I was literally about to strangle him if I didn't. At this point, we were still 10 minutes from base in a heavily forested area. Jay left the door open as he stumbled towards the tree line, and I just checked messages on my phone while waiting for him. 3 minutes came and went, and there was no sign of Jay. I shouted angrily for him to hurry up. He finally got back in the car and shut the door, and I began driving again, still glancing down at my phone as I was sending a text while I pulled back onto the road. Out of habit, as I put my phone down, I looked over at Jay and slammed on the brakes. The person sitting next to me wasn't Jay, rather some guy I'd never seen before in my life. This guy was just staring at me with an emotionless face. I didn't have any weapons on me. The only thing I could think to do was scream at the top of my lungs and dive out the driver's side door and make a run for it. I ran about 20 feet down the road but didn't hear anyone chasing me. I stopped and turned around to see the passenger side door open and the man just standing next to it, staring at me with a blank expression. Then, without moving his head to look away from me, he held eye contact as he just slowly walked into the woods and disappeared from sight. I just sat there panting in disbelief, too afraid to move. I heard Jay yelling my name and saw him come into view from around the back of my truck. I quickly walked over to him, cautiously glancing at the dark woods around me but not seeing anything. When I got up to him, I ushered him into my truck and then tore out of there as fast as I could. Jay was still decently intoxicated, but sober enough to be just as shocked as I was after I explained what happened, and he called our supervisor to explain the situation. When we got to base, I recounted the entire thing to our supervisor and our other co-workers. My supervisor decided he'd call the local police, and when they arrived, I recounted what I had witnessed for the third time that night. I described the guy as best as I could, saying he was black, looked mid-20s, wearing a red flannel coat, and a hat and jeans. I don't know what the hell that guy's intentions were, or what the hell he thought he could get away with entering my truck like that. The fact that this guy, who didn't look like your average tweaker from that area, came out of the middle of nowhere and entered a stranger's truck, and then just calmly got out and walked back into the woods thoroughly freaks the hell out of me. I don't think I'll ever forget the cold, emotionless stare he gave me. I work security at a mall in my city. I've only been hired there for half a year, but something that happened just yesterday has seriously been making me consider quitting. Like I said, I haven't been hired there that long, and frankly, my manager's kind of a hard ass, so I get stuck with the crappier shifts more often than not. These crappier shifts usually last 6 or more hours and are usually very early in the morning. So yesterday morning, just after 1:30, I headed over to the mall to clock in. The upside of not being the first person on the night shift was that I wouldn't have to go around closing all the stores and turning off all the lights. So when I got inside, all I had to do was just walk my rounds and make sure nothing was out of the ordinary. Now, there's always supposed to be at least 2 other people on shift during my shifts. At least 1 other security guard and 1 janitor. But this particular night, it looked like I was the only guard scheduled for some reason. I had no idea why, but by the time I was an hour into my shift, I had only seen 1 other person, who was the janitor. By that point, I could say with certainty I was the only guard there that night. Just after 2:40 a.m., I came across one of the clothing stores on the ground level near the back of the mall with its lights on, and the barrier raised. I automatically figured the janitor was in there, but I realized I had just passed him only 5 minutes prior emptying trash in the food courts. I knew for a fact the store had been closed up right before that, and there was no humanly possible way he could have beaten me over here. So I knew I had to check it out on the off chance there was some kind of intruder. I walked in, and right off the bat, nothing seemed out of the ordinary other than the fact the lights were all on and the security gate was open. No signs of robbery or anything like that. I began to walk across the store, peeking in each of the aisles. When I got to the 3rd aisle, I stopped dead in my tracks to a sight that sent chills down my spine. There was a mannequin standing in the center of the aisle, positioned to be facing me. I knew for a fact it was not supposed to be like that. I called out, "Is anyone in here?" No response. I slowly approached the mannequin and then walked around it to the back of the store. I was searching clothing racks and peeking behind shelves, trying to find somewhere that anyone could have been hiding. But the store seemed to be completely empty. With that, I picked up the mannequin and placed it back on its stand near the back of the store. And then I got a tingly feeling on the back of my neck, like I wasn't alone in there. Then I heard it, the sound of someone laughing hysterically, but only for a few seconds. It came from right behind me. I spun around, but there was no one. I thought for sure I was losing my mind. I went to the light switch and turned off all the lights, then closed the security gate hastily. The rest of my shift went by and I clocked out without issue. As of right now, I believe what I heard was definitely a result of lack of sleep. These early morning shifts have completely screwed up my sleep schedule, and I strongly believe it's beginning to take a mental toll on me. Currently, I don't know if I should keep that job or not. I've worked at a gas station in my town for quite a while now. Being in the country, I've had my fair share of encounters with weirdos. This story is on a whole different caliber, however, as I can't just refer to it as an encounter with a weirdo. So one night I was working a midnight to 5 a.m. shift. The counter was right beside the doors, so if I turned my head, I could see all the pumps. The road was a fairly busy one, but being it was already a rather quiet and rural area, very few people would actually stop by during the night, which is why I prefer night shifts. My shift went smoothly with only one guy coming in to get a tall boy by the time 1 a.m. rolled around. I just happened to be looking out the window to my right when I noticed a car with no lights on slowly emerge from the fog and pull in. I perked up and watched as it very slowly rolled past the pumps and came towards the store. It was some very old gray sedan. As it approached the store, I could hear music blasting from the car. I could make it out to be what sounded like some old-timey, maybe 30s or 40s orchestra-type music. The car turned and rolled right past the windows of the convenience store. I stared back at it as it did. The windows were tinted and it was dark, so I couldn't see who was in there. I watched as they rolled all the way to the end of the lot and then turned past the pumps once more and got back onto the road and drove off, the creepy old-timey music fading as they left. I honestly didn't know what to make of that. Being that I was alone, I found it more cause for alarm than I would have if someone else was working that shift. But eventually, I was able to forget about it. Like 20 minutes later, I was staring down at my phone when I heard that familiar, creepy-ass music from outside. I snapped my head up to the window to see that gray sedan slowly passing by the front of the store. This time the front windows were down, and there were 2 guys sitting in there wearing those medieval plague doctor masks and looking right at me. I just stood there staring back at them as they repeated their routine of passing by the store, then turning and getting back onto the road. They both shifted their heads to stare at me ever so slightly the entire time they passed. As soon as they were out of sight, I texted my manager and asked what I should do. Then I texted a bunch of my friends just to see if they were awake. I knew those guys were probably just trying to scare me, but nonetheless, mission accomplished because it was working. My boss responded pretty quickly saying I should just tell them off if they come back again. And that was that. Not long after that, I was lying with my head down on the counter, and I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was waking up to hearing that same 1940s orchestral music blasting from outside. I turned to the window and literally felt my heart stop when I saw the sedan right in front of the store, engine running, with the driver and passenger doors wide open. There was no one inside, though. I quickly called my boss while staring at the car, and he picked up on like the fourth ring. As I was frantically explaining the situation to him, I paused as I heard another sound from inside the store. It was the sound of a man humming along to the song playing outside. I looked down the aisle it was coming from, and looming at me from the end of the aisle were those two guys in the plague doctor costumes, just standing stiff and facing me. I made a run for it. I ran screaming into the phone all the way to my car, and my boss said he was calling the cops. I peeled out of there and drove about 3 blocks down. From there, I just went straight home. Later that night, my boss texted me and said, shockingly, nothing was stolen. It was like those guys were never there. Even if it was all just a stupid prank, I made sure that was my last night shift after that.